Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 127. I am delighted today to be joined by Chris Bowman, physio and sports performance coach based in Dubai. Chris, thank you very much for coming on.
No problem. Privilege. Like I said, just off camera before, I've listened to the podcast for a long time, so it's great to be on it.
Awesome, mate. And we just had a bit of a weird coincidence that found out we're pretty much originally from the same place, which is pretty scary. A few years apart, I've got to say, and we won't say who's older.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much for coming on, mate. I've obviously followed your work and seen your journey, but I'm also intrigued to sort of dive into your career as a whole. So do you want to just kick us off and just take us back to your career, take us through it and up to what you're currently doing?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so started out as academy physio actually at Mansfield Town, straight from university. And a weird chain of events occurred that led me to being head physio within about 6 months, I think, from graduating, which obviously is not a commonplace thing as somebody who's 22 years old, being head physio in the Football League. But it was a great learning curve, great experience, often learning by mistakes, really. And then after a year, moved on to Bolton Wanderers. A job came up at Bolton Wanderers. Obviously, they were training literally 100 yards from my mum's house, which you obviously know the area well. So we were over there in Exton. It just seemed to fit at the time. I felt like I needed some support at that point in my career. Some daily mentorship. So I went over to Bolton, was head academy physio there, and then within a year moved up to the first team. It was obviously a difficult time at that point with well-documented financial issues going on. We got relegated. Sadly the chairman passed away, so there was a lot of instability. But again, great experience. Being in that first team environment was something I probably felt a bit more comfortable with, I would say, rather than working in the academy environment, and something I always wanted to do. So that was great. And it also introduced me to a number of people that have had a big influence on my career moving forward as well. Due to the financial issues, an opportunity came up at Cambridge United to take the head physio role. So I went down there, which was a really good time, actually. I really enjoyed the autonomy of the job and, putting my spin on the department. And I'd like to think taking the department to another level. Still stay in touch with Matt Walker there, who's the head of performance. And then my old head physio from Bolton had actually gone in as head of sports science and medicine at Leeds, Steve Megson, who was someone that, had taught me a lot in our time at Bolton, who stayed in contact and mentored me through the Cambridge experience as a head physio. And the opportunity came to go to Leeds United, which obviously is a huge football club. And the takeover with Andrea Radrizzani had just happened. There was aspirations of us getting back to the Premier League, which obviously has now happened. So yeah, went to Leeds under Steve, which was great. And the pull of working again daily with Steve and developing my armory was a big one. But in the background, obviously, when I was at Cambridge, I'd already started to put the seeds of this Dubai project together. So, that just furthered during my time at Leeds. And it was just something where I got to a point after that one season where I felt like it was a do or die moment, really, in making the move here. So that's pretty much me to date.
And in terms of that, you said about sort of getting things together when you're at Cambridge. What initially led to the idea of the move? Was that more personal or was it more business?
It was more business, to be honest. So it wasn't like I ever thought, I've got this dying ambition to move to Dubai and be in the sun. It was very much a case of I'd seen a number of players since back in my Bolton days where, long-term injuries would be given a week off or 2 weeks off to go away and refresh mentally. And they would often come to Dubai 9 times out of 10, with the flight times not being too bad. And, it's got everything here really that a footballer could want. So they would often come here, you're given the program, but then your outcome measures would go back and regress. And it was just a thought that, that economically for football clubs doesn't make any sense to have a player that goes back 2 weeks in their outcome measures as a result of a 1 week holiday. And I'd also seen a lot on, social media was very prominent at that point as well. And I'd seen a lot of bad stuff on Instagram, players in international breaks working with coaches and doing things that just, if you sat there in a performance department, you're probably tearing your hair out at what you're seeing. So I always felt like there was a huge gap in the market for somebody to be here who had football experience, who had relationships within the game, and who could offer a transparent and, more importantly, safe service.
Yeah.
And I would say that those two things have always been and still remain key pillars of our business, that we want to be transparent with clubs, which is why we now get the trust and referrals. And also, we want to be safe with players, because we want them to go back to the clubs having had a good experience, and the club also having had a good experience.
That's a really important point, though, you've made there, or a few points, in terms of knowing the game and knowing the game from a club's point of view as well, isn't it? Like, you having been a head physio at a number of different clubs and held those roles and worked with players, and probably had players go and work with private practitioners as well. You sort of seen that side as well, but then also the relationships, because it sounds great, doesn't it? I mean, moving out to Dubai, setting up a business, working with players, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I know obviously you'll know that, but if people are thinking about setting up themselves, and I know you see a bit of a trend of it like right now, that people in clubs like setting up, and it's good to see, but it's got to be done in the right way, hasn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And, I've mentioned that the project went way back to the Cambridge days, and a lot of the stuff was, trying to organise where I'm going to work from. Does it have the right setup and the right feel for a footballer? And, as much as what equipment have you got in the gym, for example, for rehab and for, your conditioning stuff. And then also actually going out and directly speaking to as many people as I can in the game. People who I hadn't maybe met before, but I'd managed to get a phone number or a contact of, and just asking them, this is what I'm seeing. There's a trend of players that do go to Dubai. Do you give your players time off during long-term injuries? And B, if you do, would this be of interest if I can go there and be a kind of, an additional member of staff for you, really, that you can send to and refer to. And we managed to get Health Partners Europe on board, which is obviously the main insurance provider for the clubs as well, which was another kind of tick box really for clubs, because they knew that it wasn't going to be an additional cost. They could claim it on their medical insurance policy, and also it offers credibility as well. If Health Partners are willing to back us in what we're doing, then it shows that there's a good credibility to it.
100%. So do you want to give a little bit of an outline about what the business looks like now, Chris? Because I know we just had a little chat about it before we started recording, but just, I'm sure a lot of people have seen you working with players over there and seen some of the work you do, but I don't know how much they'll know about the sort of business and what it's structured like. So do you want to give a little outline on that?
Yeah. So to be honest, like I guess most businesses now, 3 years down the line, it's completely evolved from probably what I originally thought it would be. Obviously, when I first came out here, it was a case of working with as many footballers as possible from overseas and coming in for rehab, etc., which is one arm of our business. Off the back of that, now we've pretty much established ourselves as the go-to here in Dubai for the Arabian Gulf League players. So we've got 30 or so players that come and work with us each week. There seems to be a gap in terms of the strength component of their training here in the clubs. and even kind of match day -1, -2, or match day +1, +2 recovery protocols. So we're trying to establish ourselves as the best in class here in the UAE for that sort of stuff. Recently, we've brought 2 guys on board in the last year. Jamie, who has a background, he was at Exeter City before he moved to Dubai, working in the academy. So he heads our long-term athletic development program. So we're making good inroads into local academies. We've got an overseeing relationship with one of the better funded academies, Dubai City FC, who actually a couple of the coaches were at Bolton with me in the academy. So that was a nice, easy kind of in for us. So we oversee their entire strength and conditioning philosophy for about 600 kids there. And then we brought another guy, Chris, on board, who is an elite runner himself. So he runs a running performance, strength and conditioning for runners, which is obviously a large gap again in the market. Runners like to run, but they don't really like to do any gym work to keep them injury free. So Chris kind of takes control of that things, but both those guys help supplement the work I do. If we've got a number of players in, obviously Jamie and his football conditioning background can step in. Chris can work on some more speed and acceleration stuff and look at, running gait and trying to, improve stride length and all that sort of stuff with players and some of the drills he does. And then now we're at a stage where we're looking to recruit a couple more staff as well. We've just had an application process that closed yesterday. Somebody to work directly alongside me with a more of a rehab focus, and then somebody with a strength and conditioning background that will again help support, on a weekly basis, the Gulf League players that we've got. And then obviously we're coming up to the off season as well, so we anticipate needing more staff because the last couple of off season programs we've done, 6-week blocks, have been highly popular. So yeah,
and we'll go into that in a second because I'm intrigued to hear about the sort of structure of that off-season period. But I was going to ask as well, when you're setting the business up and you've got that idea and you've sort of seen the trend of players going over to Dubai, did it come into your mind that you were going to attract so many of the local players as well?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. It completely wasn't even a thought, to be honest. But within about 3 weeks of being here, I was introduced to the national team centre back, who wanted to do a little bit extra and ended up coming in and kind of then at that point he'd actually just come back from a torn ACL, and on the kind of initial assessment, I was thinking, this, it's no wonder you're still getting a bit of anterior knee pain. It's not really where it should be. Quad bulk was significantly down. So kind of then delved a little bit deeper into, what sort of stuff were they doing in the gym? Were they doing regular strength training? And then I was actually very fortunate as well in some respects, because I was out supporting, my friend's got a very similar project in Mykonos that works with a lot of players, Mykonos Performance. And obviously I didn't have a local client base in that first year. We'd had a great off-season period. He was still getting a lot of high-profile players over there in Mykonos after the 2018 World Cup. So I went out there to help him, just lend him a hand kind of thing. And he actually injured his knee on the first day and couldn't then really lead the sessions. And at that point, we had Robert Lewandowski with us. So obviously, ridiculous kind of situation that within that period I was training somebody who's just won the Ballon d'Or. But obviously the profile that attracts was very good. So a guy got in touch with me, Igor Coronado, after that, who had just moved to a team here in the UAE, Sharjah. Igor's background, he was at MK Dons in the academy up until kind of first year pro, and then got released from the system, played a bit of lower league, went off over to Italy because he's Brazilian background, did very well in Italy, and then he got a move here, and he got in touch with me. So I started working with Igor, and he was just flying all season. So he's now, over the last 3 years, head and shoulders the best player in the league. And in that year as well, Sharjah actually won the league for the first time in 27 years. So and he brought in the other Brazilian guys, and it just snowballed from there. So yeah, like I say, there was a lot of fortune around that UAE market, but ultimately at the same time, I guess you've got to have satisfied customers that want to refer you to other people. So I do take that as a compliment that we've ended up with so many, because if we weren't doing the right things, then we wouldn't have any.
Yeah, and that's why I said before that the idea is great, isn't it? But then carrying out that idea and being effective and achieving results for people is a different thing. And then the other side of it is building a business that's scalable and effective, isn't it, as well? Because obviously there's only one of you. And if you're getting busier and busier all the time, and you've just talked about how it's grown already, I was going to ask as well, where do you see this going? Like, where do you see the business growing to? Or is that something that you're just going to leave open and sort of adapt as you need to?
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at opening a second site within the Jumeirah complex already, that we're hoping will be in play by the off season. That'll be more of a rehab focus to it, and within that facility, there's actually an altitude chamber as well, so we can recommission that and utilize that, especially for kind of the off season stuff, or even rehab when we've got a player over, and use those conditions. And importantly, in the in the summer months here, end of July, August, it's so intense out there on the grass that that having that facility would be a real bonus for us to use. And then, I mean, we do want to branch out into other countries. The market in Saudi is an interesting one for us. We've got our eyes on Abu Dhabi a little bit, because it's about an hour and a half drive from Dubai at the minute. Well, an hour and a half drive, and then we've got a number of players that make that journey, but at the moment they can only maybe come once every 2 weeks. Whereas if we have a presence there, it's something where we can actually work with them, 2 times a week, like I said, game day -2 and game day +1, and it would make sense for us to probably have a presence there. And then we're very open-minded. I mean, I think the pandemic at the minute is kind of something we need to just be mindful of, and not run before we can walk, kind of thing.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Now, in the off season, and I know we've seen it the last few years, or I've certainly seen it on your social media. You see a number of players going over to work with yourself, and I know we've talked about where they've come from. They've come from contacts and growing that network and reaching out to people and doing good work essentially as well. What's the approach you're taking with these players? So when they're coming in the off season, and we've got a few questions sent in as well, so we'll tackle those in a little bit. But I just wanted to know, like, your approach with those players going into whether it be a sort of 2-week block, 4-week block, 6-week block, or whatever you've got with that player.
Yeah. So I think initially, obviously, that subjective assessment with the player or the club is very important. So, like I said, transparency is key. So we need to know, has this player had injury issues? What is their reason for training? We've got players who've been with us who are due to go on international duty in a week's time. We've got players who maybe have been involved in playoffs and coming at the back end of a really long season. So that ultimately influences what we do with them. And then also the kind of timing of when they are here. So if they are here mid-May to late May, in that first couple of weeks of the off season, realistically, we don't really want to be running them too much up and down the past the Burge and all that sort of stuff. It is very much more of an injury prevention and a strength focus at that phase. The following kind of couple of weeks at the start of June will be a bit of a mix of some aerobic work plus the strength. And then as we get more towards the kind of return to the training, then we're looking at that aerobic conditioning, building a solid aerobic base. Again, injury prevention work if they've got any ongoing issues. We need to find out, what the player has been doing as well over the course of that 6 weeks, where they're at, because ultimately, if someone's just been putting their feet up for 4 weeks, as opposed to somebody who's been training intensely for 4 weeks, it's a very different athlete that we're dealing with. So that's kind of our approach, I would say, to it. And then also it depends how many sessions the guys want to take. I mean, the majority of players when they come probably take 4 sessions, 5 sessions throughout a 7-day period. But there are players that stay for a longer period of time. We've had Stephen Taylor, ex-Newcastle, with us the last couple of years, and he's been here for like 3 weeks at a time and wants double sessions and things. Or we've had other players that have been here sent for rehab for 2 weeks. So, if we've got enough time, then we can obviously put more of your standard program together that is influenced by us, with a 4 or 5 session kind of training block. Realistically, it needs to be guided by the stuff they've already been doing. So that's where that transparency and the communication with the club comes in, very, very high level of importance on that.
Yeah, and we have spoke about that before. I remember speaking to Shane Murphy about that sort of communication between yourself, like as a practitioner, and the club. What is it? Do you face any challenges with that in terms of linking up with clubs and coaches? And then also, what is it generally they expect from you? Are you giving reports or anything like that, or is it just simply like a conversation?
Again, it varies, to be honest, practitioner to practitioner, club to club. So the initial conversation will always be a case of, do you want to send the program for the player, or do you want me to program? And if you want me to program, is there certain things you don't want us to do? Things like axial load and, maybe lay off the sand work because they've had this and this injury in the past. So that's the first kind of conversation. And then, sorry, just repeat the question there.
Yeah, I just said about linking with clubs. So in terms of how easy it is to communicate with clubs, but then also in terms of reporting back. So is it simply a conversation? Yeah. I think you've answered that bit. It does depend on the club.
Yeah, it depends on the club. And some practitioners want you to call them every day. Others are happy to get a report at the end of the week as much as a phone call. Others want a written report with, all the data there. We've got the stat sports unit, so we do have the physical metrics when we're out on the field in terms of, the total distances, run, high intensity meters, sprint meters, accels, decels. We've got that sort of stuff. We obviously gym-based things. We can tell them, have we progressed lifts or not progressed lifts? So we can deliver that data if required, but often it'll just be in the form of a phone call, really. Quite happy with that.
And then I was going to ask Chris as well, when these players are coming out to see you, what's their general sort of feel on what they want to do? Are they coming out saying, right, I need to work on my speed? Are they coming out with real specifics, or are they coming out to say, right, I just need to work with you for this period and sort of leave it up to you in terms of what we do? And then obviously you can link in with the club.
Mostly the second, to be honest. Mostly they're very open to just kind of letting us guide the program. Unless they've had a previous injury or an issue. But, if they're getting ready for an international week of fixtures, then they just want kind of those game-specific movements, a bit of volume in the legs, a feel of the ball, an hour of conditioning. Obviously, we've got the warm weather, so the heart rate response on that is through the roof. So you'd like to think it's beneficial. Well, it's beneficial going into when they go back to the UK for those fixtures. And the same, to be honest, in terms of the general off-season sort of thing. So a lot of the time, especially when you're kind of in week 3 and 4, maybe the guys have done a little bit on the treadmill. Maybe they've been a bit slack on the diet or whatever in the first 2 weeks. And they just need something to kickstart that off-season program for them, and to come here and work in the heat for an hour in the morning intensely, do some football specific running, have a feel of the ball. Obviously we try, and if a player wants individualized sessions, we will do that, but equally we've found to work quite well with the small groups. So at times we've had kind of 8 to 10 in a group. We'll always make sure we've got 3 or 4 practitioners on the field at that point, but being in that group environment, they get a little bit more out of it, rather than just going down kind of the local park, or even just on the running tracks that are out here, and just sticking the GPS on and trying to hit some high intensity meters. they actually have to get there because they're running against their pal from, another club, or, often they'll book in together as well. So yeah, it works very well in terms of that dynamic.
Because they're getting that team feel again, aren't they? Coming out and working within that team. And then obviously the other thing for you in terms of, I'm guessing, like any sort of contextual conditioning work, is that you can use those other players then as well, can't you?
Yeah, exactly.
So the drills are able to become a little bit more specific rather than having a single player with mannequins or however it's set up.
Yeah, spot on. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, we've had I put it out on social media, Chris, to get a couple of questions in, and there's been a couple sent in. So I'm going to start with this one. So, and I think you did briefly touch on it before, but what testing do you use before working with an individual or a team?
Yeah. So it probably applies more to the team-based stuff. So like I mentioned, we've got that, we obviously the philosophy for the football club out here. So the one we tend to use is a 1200 meter shuttle run, effectively called the Brisbane run. So 20 meters back, 40 meters back, 60 meters back, repeat times 5. The theory on that being that you're measuring maximal aerobic speed. The reason I like that one is it's pretty bang for buck, and also there's a practical element to it. So when we go into our conditioning phase after getting that maximal aerobic speed score, we condition on 15-second linear runs, basically. So we can actually then program at 100, 120, 140% of that player's maximal aerobic speed. So you can make it pretty specific to that player. So, or even like subgroups sort of thing, when the scores are close, you might have 5 players that are running 90 meters in 15 seconds. You might have another group of players that's running 94 meters in 15 seconds. So they're actually working at that maximal aerobic speed. And by doing that, we've found, very good then retest results and ultimately performance on the pitch as well.
And then what about in terms of any like movement quality stuff, or if players are coming over with injuries, like is there any doing in terms of testing and monitoring for those guys?
Yeah. So we look at 5 rep max testing. We've got the handheld dynamometer for hamstrings. We do want to improve that. I won't name the companies that we were speaking to. But yeah, we obviously want to get kind of that sort of stuff in, force decks, and that comes into this second facility and trying to increase our service provision as well. In terms of movement screens, we kind of have taken a bit from different things, to be honest. So we do a lot of work with the stick mobility protocols, which we really like. We do a lot in terms of like BOSU and single leg balance dissociation. Can players do that? Some stuff from the Titleist TPI as well, because we have got a golf element to our business. So, and then 5 rep max testing that I've touched on anyway, be that single leg press or hex bar. So we take from different areas. There's not really we use an FMS or anything like that as such. And then obviously with my physio background, I'll do MSK screening tests as required. So if players are coming in from an injury point of view, ACL or whatever, then I want to know what their quad bulk's like. I want to know what their prone knee bend is. I want to know what their Thomas test is, all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. And then another question, mate, is I'm gonna reword this a little bit, but what is your philosophy or your periodization philosophy around strength and power training in football?
Yeah. So we try and go very unilateral with our approach, to be honest. My theory on that is, in football, you're very rarely caught square on, or shouldn't be. So you're always in that split stance position. So, we work a lot with Bulgarian split squats, single leg RDLs, all that sort of stuff. When we do have, obviously, like your hex bar lifts and compound lifts are common practice. In terms of power, obviously, we're looking at rate of force production there. So we've got the Vertimax in, which we use quite a lot, to be honest. And we're often using that as part of our kind of game day -2 stuff with the guys here. So really looking at potentiation and stuff for those guys. And then I think as well, obviously you've seen on Instagram, we use the sand quite a lot. So when it comes down to accelerations, decelerations, the total work that player's got to exert when they're running at velocities in the sand is far higher than it is on a harder surface, just because you've not got that same kind of ground contact time. So we do use the sand quite a lot when it comes down to the speed and power work for your banded runs and stuff, but on the sand, which they don't necessarily thank me for.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because that's one area that I know very little about, mainly because we don't have much sand around here. But that is interesting. So would you treat that more as like a resisted sprint work, for example, with that impact it has on the player?
Yeah. So that, and then acceleration, decelerations as well, because ultimately in the sand, obviously you're having to, you really have to look at what your loading patterns are. So you've got to, if you're working laterally, change direction, whatever, you've really got to absorb that force and then propel out of the sand to be able to change from one direction to the other. So, after the sessions, the guys are often saying, the glutes are really sore and that sort of stuff, because they're having to actually utilize them and then, force themselves into triple extension to get that 30-meter dash.
That's interesting, really interesting. And I know you said before as well, just sort of extending that question with the strength and power focus, you mentioned before about there being like a gap with the local players, that I'm guessing that they don't really have much S&C support, but more in terms of the strength side. Is that what you meant from that they weren't sort of on any strength programs, and that's where you guys you sort of fill that gap?
Yeah, I would say so. And, the reason for that, I'm not really sure. I think there's, the beauty of being out here is different cultures that you're exposed to. So there's quite a heavy Brazilian culture actually within clubs out here in terms of their S&C staff. And my opinion is that they don't tend to favour the heavy lifts and stuff that is more common practice within our British culture. So you quite often see that a few of these guys, don't have huge amounts of lean tissue, and so that's something that we try and put in place, and then obviously the guys feel good about that going into their games. The other side of it is that when it comes to the local market here, there's probably been a lack of sporting development generally in the UAE for many, many years, until probably about 10 years ago. There was a big government change. So with an emphasis on sports, and now it's great. In November every year, they do a 30-30 challenge. So everybody's encouraged to do 30 minutes of exercise every single day for the month of November, even in companies. So there's a big shift towards that. But the problem with that is that obviously when you take it way back, these guys haven't been exposed as children in the first 10 years of their life to gross motor skills. They've not played cricket and tennis and all these multi-sports to develop that long-term athletic development in that phase. So, all they've really done is probably roll the ball out on the playground, and that's it. So actually when they step into the building athletically, there's quite a lot of work to do with them, which is just interesting really, that this it's a different culture, and it's something that would be commonplace to us over there in the UK, but isn't here. And that kind of links into our rehab model as well, because I see a lot of ACLs here. Incidence of ACLs is through the roof. Now, whether that's because there's artificial surfaces here more than grass, because there's not too much grass, but I personally will put it down to this shift and this lack of motor development in their early years, and then all of a sudden, let's say 10 years ago, you're asked to go and do loads of sport, but you've not developed any of your motor skills as a young adolescent.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I suppose at the same time, with such a a small to no training age, you can get some really good results with those guys as well, can't you? When you do start to educate them around the benefits of strength training and adding some power work in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we've anecdotally seen across the board with our guys. And obviously then the knock-on effect of the reputation we're having. But all it comes down to really is us doing the basics well and just teaching these guys stuff that is commonplace to us over there, but isn't here. So
brilliant. I did just check before. We have got one more question that's come in, and it's more focused on business, to be honest. And it'd be interesting. It simply says, "Any advice for someone setting up a business?" So,
yeah.
what would be if someone's sort of, I don't know whether you want to take it that they've been at a club and they're going to just do the same sort of route as you, or whether they've not been at a club and they're just going to set up from scratch. What would be some words of wisdom from yourself that's set up?
Yeah, I think the two things are hard work and persistence, and obviously I listen to a lot of business podcasts myself or whatever, and the high performance one that Jake Humphrey does, and he's had really successful people on there, and it's no secret that the common theme comes out that hard work and perseverance will get you towards your goal. Like, it's not a linear curve to get to where we are, and at the same time we try and appreciate the journey we've been on, because it's been a great one over the last 3 years. But it's not been without its struggles along the way, and you've got to be willing to put those hours in, and wake up early, work late nights, especially with the client base that we all want to work with. These guys' schedules are all over the place. They've got a game one day, and then they're off, and then the day off changes, and it is all over the place still, even though you're in an independent practitioner. It's no different in many respects to the demands of a football environment either, because you're still working with athletes. Best example being tomorrow is generally our off day, but I'm working at the moment with a very good tennis player who's here, and he wants a session tomorrow. So the day off is not a day off. So you've just got to do what you've got to do to make your dreams really come true. So it's not, if you want it to happen and want it to work for you, then you'll be willing to do that and do the hours basically.
Brilliant. Now, mate, we'll go on to some of the, I always say quick fire. I need to change the name of this because it's never quick fire, but some of the questions we asked everyone on the end of the podcast. First one being, who are some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Well, I've mentioned one already. So Steve Megson would have to be there. Very, very talented physio, very, very skilled manual therapist. And like I said, it was a big pull for me to go and work with him every day at Leeds. I saw it really as a daily opportunity of CPD, to be honest. So that would be one. Early in my career, I had some great help from Steve Kemp, who's over at the FA, in terms of, and he's somebody I still stay in touch with now. And then I've worked with a number of very, very good practitioners. Matt Walker I've mentioned as well. He allowed me to take hold of that department at Cambridge and make it my own, and supported me with that. He could see that I had kind of innovative ideas, and I wanted to try and improve things and the way it ran. So I would say they're the key ones really.
Awesome. And then what would you say your best strength or your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
I would say communication, to be honest, and it's very important, like we've mentioned, when it comes to how we work. I'm not afraid of picking up the phone and speaking to anybody at the club, because it's very important to recognise that I've got this player maybe for 4 or 5 sessions. These guys see the player every single day for 9 months, 10 months of the year. So, as we know, it takes a good 6 to 8 weeks to really train somebody properly. So I need to know what they've been doing, what shouldn't we be doing, the underpinning value of our business is safe practice. So, you know, you've just got to be able to communicate. And also now working in this environment with players from Brazil, players from the UAE, players from Spain. I've had Chilean players, Italian players, English. It's crazy. It's crazy, and the communication is probably the biggest strength, I would say.
And then next one, is there any sort of CPD that you've done recently or in recent times that sort of stands out for you that's had the biggest impact? So whether it be like might be a course, an article, research, a podcast, like, is there anything that sort of stands out?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one that's influenced my practice in the last 12 to 18 months is probably the stick mobility stuff. So I was introduced to it by some guys over in Australia, actually, and immediately just kind of got that and got why an athlete would engage with it. Because sometimes with like the yoga and different bits and bobs, the compliance at clubs wasn't what it should be, even though we were trying to put a good recovery protocol in place. Whereas with these things, I mean, as far as I'm aware, they're not too widely used in England, in the clubs at the moment. Maybe they are now, but a year ago or so, they weren't. But player engagement with them is very, very good, because I guess the player feels, or the athlete feels like they're doing a little bit more than just a stretch. Also, I mean, the results are there anyway. You get massive improvements in joint range of motion. You've got synergistic muscle firing going on with different techniques that are within it. And, you know, ultimately proofs in the pudding. We use that stuff. I probably use that stuff with every single session of my day as part of the movement prep part of the session, before we go into the activation and then whatever we're doing. So, yeah, there's got to be that really over the last 12 months, I think.
And was that like a specific course, or is that like a certain coach or something that you've linked up with for that?
Yeah. So Stick Mobility are in the UK. I think the distributor was Rock Tape, actually. I mean, I had Mikel Antonio here for some rehab from West Ham, and we did some work with him on the stick stuff, and he really became receptive straight away. And then I got a call from Rich at West Ham, who wanted to buy the units, buy the sticks straight away. So, you know, the athlete feedback is as good as kind of the feedback I can give. So stick mobility courses are common practice across the UK. I don't know now with the pandemic, but they are common practice around there. So I would highly recommend people to take that on, because it goes multi-sport with what we're doing. Like, we use it a lot with our golf fitness program and increase in rotation that can then, you know, give real benefits to some of our golfers in terms of their club head speed and different stuff like that. So
brilliant. Well, Antonio's getting some airtime on this podcast. He was mentioned a couple of episodes ago with Andy. So, next one, mate. What would you say? And I think you might have answered this already, but what would you say the most important trait is for a coach to have?
For a coach, I think to be adaptable. I would say be adaptable, like we've mentioned on this podcast. There's various different clients that come to us at different phases of their off season or different injury histories, and you know, one day your best laid plans might be completely ripped up, so you've got to be on the ball and adaptable.
Brilliant. And then this is an intriguing one for me, because the amount of players that you've worked with of all different experience levels, and like you said, you've the Lewandowskis, I know you've got some Premier League players over there at the moment. What do you see any sort of common traits with those players? So the players that have really excelled in their careers, are there any sort of traits that stand out for you that are common amongst all of them?
I would say that they're relentless in their pursuit of being perfect. Do you know what I mean? So the nutrition, the body fat percentage that they come in at doesn't really, you know, they don't have that 2-week binge, for example. That just isn't a thing when the season finishes. They stay consistent with what they're doing. Okay, yeah, they drop their running loads down, but they're still on their injury prevention work every single day. they're still trying to find that extra 1%, you know, the old marginal gain stuff with Dave Brailsford. Obviously, I'm working with this tennis guy at the moment, and it's really insightful for me to get that perspective. You know, he's 21, he's world number 11. Where does he want to go next? And what's it taken for him to get to being, you know, he was in the top 10 as well. So pretty much 10th best in the world by the time he's 21. And he's telling me, you know, he was out on the court as a kid till 2 a.m. sometimes. You know, it wasn't uncommon for him to be on the court still at 2 a.m. getting his serve perfect until it was there. And that's probably something that differs from a football environment. I know it's easier with an individualized sport because you're trying to work with the overall training loads of 25 players and make sure some can cope with that, others can't cope with that. Mm-hmm. But you know, going back to the original question, the top guys, what do they do? Well, that's what they do. They don't leave any stone unturned.
Yeah, no, brilliant, mate. This is class. Loads in this one again. I think people really relate to this because I'm sure there's a lot of people, like I said, that are thinking about setting up privately and taking into consideration some of the things that you've gone into there. I think it shows that the mindset behind what you've done and the successes you've had so far, but then that this isn't the end game. Like there's still more to come. And like you said, adaptation is really key, isn't it? And yeah, it'll be really interesting, mate, just to see how things go the next few years. I'll be an interested follower in terms of the work and the guys that you have going over there. And yeah, big thank you for coming on the podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Ben. Cheers.
Just finally, Chris, sorry. If people want to, if they're not following you and they want to see the work that you're doing, do you want to just give them the social media links?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, my private one is Chris_EliteDXP. And then our business page is Elite Sports Performance _DXP. So, you know, the business page will have the range of all clients that we're working with across the board. And mine will be a little bit more football focused, I guess.
Awesome. And that's both on Instagram?
Yes, Instagram. Yeah. We're not on Twitter yet.
Okay. Awesome, mate. No, thanks a lot, Chris. And we'll stay in touch.
Cheers, Ben. Thanks, mate.
Top man.